The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 21st chapter. Jesus said, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Then he told them a parable. "Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is already near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Be on guard so that your hearts are not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, and that day does not catch you unexpectedly, like a trap. For it will come upon all who live on the face of the whole earth. Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place, and to stand before the Son of Man." The Gospel of the Lord. One of the items sold at the auction here at church earlier this month was a poster with a well-known piece by the author Robert Fulghum called "All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten." And it includes wisdom like share everything, play fair, don't hit people, clean up your own mess, and when you go out, watch out for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. All we really need to know we learned in kindergarten, Fulghum tells us. Well, Fulghum has written other pieces too, including one in which he talks about what he would like for Christmas. First, he describes some things that it would be nice to get, but then he goes on to say what he really, really wants for Christmas. "I want to be 5 years old again for 1 hour. I want to laugh a lot and cry a lot. I want to be picked up and rocked to sleep in someone's arms and carried up to bed just one more time. I want my childhood back." Wouldn't it be nice for just an hour to have none of the pressures, none of the stresses, none of the responsibilities that weigh in on us as they seem to do in adult life, and to be a child again? What I'm trying to say here, I guess, is that Christmas is also for grown-ups. It isn't fair, and it isn't what God intended, that children should have a monopoly on Christmas. Christmas is for anyone wondering if there really is a God. Christmas tells us that God is real, and he proved himself real in the birth of a baby. And it goes even further than that. It tells us in this real God, we find everything we need to know to make it through the tough times of life. Today's gospel seems eons away from Christmas. It speaks of blood-red moons and intense fiery solar flares and entire nations feeling threatened by all this, of horribly destructive hurricanes blowing across the oceans, and of the Son of Man coming in the midst of all this cosmic fireworks. So what's that all about? Several years ago, Amazon described a book that was written by Lawrence Joseph. That book was published in 2008, and it was called Apocalypse 2012. And here's what Amazon said about this book. "Don't look up, it won't help. You can't get out of the way, you can't dig a hole deep enough to hide. The end is coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. So why read this book? Because you can't look away when not just the religious fanatics are saying we're all going to be destroyed, but the scientists are in on it too. Here's what they're saying. We're 1 million years overdue for a mass extinction. The sun at radiation minimum is acting much worse than at solar maximum, and one misdirected spewing of plasma could fry us in an instant. The magnetic field which shields us from harmful radiation is developing a mysterious crack. Our solar system is entering an energetically hostile part of the galaxy. The Yellowstone supervolcano is getting ready to blow, and if it does, we can look forward to nuclear winter and 90% annihilation. The Maya, the world's greatest timekeepers ever, say that it's all going to stop on December 21st, 2012. So see, there's nothing you can do, but you might as well sit back and enjoy the show. Now that's an encouraging bit of writing, don't you think? Aren't you glad that you didn't read that in the fall of 2012? Now I need to point out that that's an example of apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature takes a crisis or an anticipated crisis and it describes it like the end of the world. Now, thankfully, not too many people took the warnings of Lawrence Joseph in that book too seriously. The book of Revelation is called the Apocalypse because it describes the crisis of a first-century Hitler-like emperor named Domitian who was persecuting the Christians, and it uses end-of-the-world language to describe that crisis. Unfortunately, I think people today and throughout Christian history have tried to read far more into that book of the Bible than is really there. Because if we understand apocalyptic literature, we also understand that writers of that kind of literature use veiled and symbolic language to describe events that were current to their time. These words of Jesus in our gospel reading today are also an example of apocalyptic literature. They describe what everyone feared and what actually did take place in 70 AD, that the Romans would destroy the city of Jerusalem in putting down a revolt by the Jews in that year. We need to remember that Luke no doubt wrote his gospel after the destruction of Jerusalem had already happened. And so it must have seemed to those early readers of Luke's gospel that the end of the world was at hand. Crises come and crises go, don't they? And when they come, they often make us feel like our world is falling apart, and even like the end is near. Sometimes it happens when a loved one dies. Sometimes it happens when a marriage is crumbling, or a job has evaporated, or when we hear from the doctor that a serious illness has invaded what we thought was a healthy body. All of these things make the future a scary and a less certain thing. The terrorist acts in Paris and in Mali in the past couple of weeks have created a culture of fear. And some are saying that this is greater than what we experienced after the 9/11 attacks. One person from New York said, "Terrorists are insidious people. Your neighbor could be one and you wouldn't know. I feel we should close our borders until we get the rest of the world under control. And if that's inhumane, then I'm inhumane." Suspicion of Muslims and intolerance of refugees has exploded. One woman said, "How are we to determine if they are a good Muslim or ISIS? Unfortunately, we have to be cautious of all Muslims." And then she went on to say, "I have never been fearful of anything in my life because I put my faith in God. But I went out this week and bought a pistol." But the apocalyptic tradition we have in the Bible also tells us that when events happen that seem to be the end of the world, we shouldn't panic. It also tells us when the end of our world seems inevitable, Christ will come and make us strong by being a part of what we're going through. At the very end of our gospel reading today, we read, "Be alert at all times, praying that you may have the strength to escape all these things that will take place and to stand before the Son of Man." Advent tells us that our God is not a God who sits off in the corner of the universe somewhere, unable to relate to what's happening to us, but instead is a God who comes to us when our world is falling apart. And especially then, to give us the strength to make it through. The promise of Jesus in our gospel reading today is that God is present and acting within human history, within the good, the bad, and the ugly, to bring about a victorious conclusion. At the end of the apocalyptic book of Revelation, we read that the ultimate conclusion of God's acting in history will be a new beginning, a new creation where God himself will wipe away every tear, where death will be no more, where mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things will have passed away. The important message of biblical apocalyptic writing is always the hope that it contains. So we're called on this first Sunday in Advent to embrace that hope. We're called to look for the hand of God in the whole of life, in the good and the bad, and yes, even in the ugly. It's like the budding trees on a fig tree, says Jesus. As soon as they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that the summer is already near. One of the phrases that I believe stands out throughout the Bible is, "Be not afraid." When the angel comes to the shepherds outside Bethlehem in a splendor of light, the word is, "Be not afraid." When Jesus comes to the disciples in the middle of a lake on a dark night and they can't begin to figure out what's happening, the message is, "Be not afraid." Even the Old Testament people were told by the prophet Isaiah, "Fear not." And why? Because God says, "I am with you." So are you a middle school student wondering whether other kids really like you? Be not afraid. Are you a college student not sure what to do with your life, what the future might hold for you? Be not afraid. Are you facing life alone where previously two of you faced life together? Be not afraid. Are you someone who worries so much about terrorists creating a Paris event here that you don't even want to walk the Ped Mall or go to a football or a basketball game? Be not afraid. Why? Because the message of Advent is one of hope. God is real, and God comes to us bringing hope and salvation. Christmas is not merely nostalgia. Remembering is a part of Christmas, but it's so much more than just remembering our childhood. Christmas makes the claim that God isn't just a theory. God isn't just a wish. God isn't a fairy tale. In the birth of a baby, God proved that he was real. And there's hope in that birth for you and me, because it tells us that this real God is able to come to us, giving us the help and the strength we need to make it through, even when our world seems to be falling apart. Be not afraid. Our God is with us.